Took 9 years before but I began to play the nightclub in and around Southern California. 5 sets a night, fist fights galore, and.
Dwight Yoakam has spent decades as one of country music's most recognizable stars, delivering hit songs, memorable performances, and successful film roles. Even now, he continues working and performing despite reaching an age when many artists slow down. But recent developments have raised questions about his health, personal life, and future in music. In this video, we explore what's happening behind the scenes and reveal what fans need to know about Dwight Yoakam's uncertain new chapter. The headlines that suddenly changed everything for Dwight Yoakam. For years, Dwight Yoakam's distance from the spotlight seemed harmless. Fans saw it as the choice of a country legend who had earned the right to step back. They respected his privacy, even while hoping for another album, another tour, or one more burst of the firebrand energy that made him famous. But lately, the silence has felt different. This time, the attention did not come from Dwight announcing a new project. It came from headlines, rumors, and stories that left fans with more questions than answers. Reports began circulating about possible health concerns, canceled appearances, and uncertainty over whether Dwight could return to the stage the way fans remembered him. Not every claim was confirmed, and that distinction matters. Still, the mood around his name had changed. The stories were no longer simply about his music, acting career, or achievements. They were about his well-being. Suddenly, the same man once viewed as almost untouchable was being discussed in terms of age, fatigue, and vulnerability. That shift was difficult for longtime fans to process. Dwight built his reputation on toughness. He was the sharp-dressed cowboy who brought a rebellious edge to country music, challenged Nashville's rules, and later proved himself as an actor. For decades, he seemed to possess an almost endless ability to reinvent himself. So when photos or reports appeared suggesting that he looked thinner, older, or less energetic than he once did, people noticed. Some concert-goers also shared impressions of performances where his movements appeared more measured and his energy seemed lower. Of course, aging does not automatically mean something is wrong. Dwight is now in his late 60s, and after decades of performing, it is natural for an artist's pace to change. Fans pushed back against some of the darker speculation, arguing that photographs and isolated moments could never tell the whole story. Yet once a particular narrative takes hold, it can be difficult to stop. Some outlets began hinting that Dwight might be dealing with illnesses, even though there was no clear official confirmation behind those claims. His privacy only made the situation more complicated. Dwight has always been careful about what he shares about his personal life. That privacy may have protected him from unwanted attention, but it also created a space where rumors could grow. When a celebrity says nothing, people often start creating their own explanations. Fans searched interviews, concert footage, and social media posts for clues, trying to figure out whether something had genuinely changed. And that is what made the headlines feel so painful. Dwight Yoakam was never supposed to fit the image of a fragile celebrity. His entire career was built around resilience, rebellion, and refusing to be boxed in. He was the country star who carved out his own lane, and the actor who brought the same raw attitude to Hollywood. Seeing his name connected to stories about weakness and uncertainty felt almost impossible to reconcile with the image fans had carried for decades. But beneath all the speculation is a much simpler truth. Dwight is human. A life spent performing, touring, creating, and constantly living under public expectations eventually takes a toll. What fans interpret as decline could simply be the visible reality of getting older. Still, that does not make the change any easier to watch. For fans, that uncertainty became its own source of heartbreak. They were used to waiting for Dwight to surprise them, not worrying about what his next appearance might reveal. Instead of discussing the songs that made him famous, conversations increasingly focused on whether he was healthy enough to keep performing. Every new photograph, could become evidence. Every missed appearance could become another rumor, and every quiet response from Dwight seemed to make the mystery larger. None of that proves the worst theories, but it explains why concern spread so quickly among loyal, longtime fans. And as more attention turned toward Dwight's health, one question began hanging over everything else. Was there actually something serious happening behind his silence? Or were fans simply watching a legend grow older in public? Keep watching to find out. The canceled shows that made fans start to worry. When a string of Dwight Yoakam's scheduled performances was quietly canceled or postponed, the concern around him grew much louder. Fans who had bought tickets months ahead were suddenly left disappointed, often receiving little more than vague explanations about unforeseen circumstances or scheduling conflicts. On the surface, those reasons might have sounded ordinary, but for longtime followers, something about the situation felt different. Dwight had built a reputation for being professional and committed to his fans. He was not known for walking away from performances without a serious reason. So when dates began disappearing from schedules, people naturally started asking questions. Was it simply a change in plans? Or was something happening behind the scenes that fans were not being told? Those who had watched Dwight perform in recent years also claimed to notice subtle differences. His unmistakable voice was still there, carrying that familiar twang that had defined so much of his music. But some longtime fans felt that his stage presence had changed. They described him as moving more carefully, appearing tired at times, or relying more heavily on the microphone stand. Others pushed back against those observations. Dwight was approaching 70, and expecting him to perform with exactly the same energy he had shown decades earlier was hardly realistic. Time changes every performer. A slower movement or a quieter moment on stage does not automatically point to a serious health problem. But social media does not always leave room for that kind of caution. A single photograph showing Dwight looking tired could travel across the internet within minutes. Soon, ordinary images became fuel for speculation. Some fans began posting messages asking others to pray for him, while others shared favorite songs and personal stories about what his music had meant during difficult moments in their own lives. What started as concern quickly became something much bigger. A public outpouring of love for an artist who had been part of their lives for decades. And it wasn't only fans paying attention. Musicians, industry insiders, and people who had worked with Dwight also noticed the growing conversation. Some expressed concern, while others urged people to respect his privacy. A few defended him strongly, pointing out that rumors can cause real harm when they are built on photographs, assumptions, and incomplete information. Still, the lack of a clear statement left a dangerous vacuum. The less people knew, the more room there was for theories to grow. And that is one of the hardest parts of being famous. The people who care about you most can sometimes feel entitled to every detail of your life. Fans genuinely wanted to know that Dwight was okay, but their concern could easily turn into speculation. That was the uncomfortable reality surrounding him. The headlines, photographs, and rumors were beginning to overshadow the artist himself, the man whose songs had spent decades giving voice to loneliness, heartbreak, independence, and resilience. And perhaps what fans feared most was not simply the possibility that Dwight might be struggling. It was something more emotional. They were beginning to wonder whether the cowboy who once seemed larger than life was finally approaching the moment when he might have to hang up his hat. But before the worry, what struggles shaped Dwight into this legend? Stay tuned to find out. The struggles that built Dwight Yoakam into a country legend. Long before the rumors, the canceled shows, and the questions surrounding his future, Dwight Yoakam had already lived a life that could have been a movie. Born on October 23, 1956 in Pikeville, Kentucky, Dwight was the oldest of 3 children born to Ruth and David Yoakam. His father had served in the U.S. Army, and after leaving the military, the family eventually settled in Columbus, Ohio. His father worked at a Westinghouse factory and later owned a Texaco gas station, giving Dwight a modest upbringing far removed from the world of country music fame. Music entered Dwight's life early. His father had brought home a K guitar from his time in the Army, but after failing to learn how to play it, he gave the instrument to his son. Dwight eventually broke that guitar, but he received another one for Christmas while he was in 4th grade. Around that same time, he wrote his first song. The music surrounding him also shaped his ears. His parents played records by artists like Johnny Cash and Johnny Horton, while country music filled the radio. During family road trips, the Yoakams would even sing together as they traveled to visit Dwight's grandparents. At the same time, Dwight was fascinated by rock and roll stars he saw on television, including Elvis Presley. By the time the family moved to another Columbus neighborhood in 1968, Dwight's interests were becoming impossible to ignore. At Northland High School, his mother encouraged all 3 children to join the school band. Dwight played drums, but music was only one part of his growing confidence. He also joined drama class and landed the role of Charlie in a production of Flowers for Algernon. That experience mattered more than it might seem. Dwight later credited the performance with helping him become more comfortable in front of an audience. Then, during his senior year, he and several classmates formed a rock and roll group for the school talent show. The band became popular enough to start playing private parties around Columbus under the name the Greaser Band. Dwight was already discovering something that would define much of his future. He did not simply want to listen to music, he wanted to perform it. After high school, Dwight briefly attended Ohio State University, but college could not hold his attention for long. He dropped out and decided to pursue music seriously. That decision immediately came with risks. While performing at a club in Gahanna, Ohio, Dwight met a man who promised to help him secure a recording contract. Instead, the man turned out to be a con artist. For someone just starting out, it could have been enough to end the dream. It didn't. Dwight moved to Nashville, hoping to break into country music. But Nashville was not exactly waiting for him. The industry was leaning toward country pop and the polished Nashville sound, while Dwight was deeply attached to honky-tonk traditional country and bluegrass. His style did not fit neatly into what was popular at the time. Rather than changing himself to fit the industry, Dwight kept pushing forward. Eventually, he moved to Los Angeles after encouragement from Billy Alves, a former member of the Greaser Band. Once again, success did not come immediately. But Los Angeles gave Dwight something Nashville had not: an environment where alternative country and cowpunk were beginning to attract attention. Artists such as Joe Ely, Rank and File, and Lone Justice were finding audiences, and Dwight started performing in clubs where those musicians also appeared. Then came the meeting that changed everything. In 1982, Dwight met guitarist and producer Pete Anderson at a Los Angeles bar. The two quickly discovered they shared a love for artists such as Merle Haggard. Anderson also recognized something important about Dwight. He understood that the singer's old-school country sound could work in the growing California alternative scene. More importantly, he believed Dwight had something worth recording. By 1984, Dwight had written a large collection of songs, and Anderson encouraged him to put them together on an extended play. Anderson became the producer and lead guitarist, beginning a partnership that would remain central to Dwight's career for years. The project was called Guitars, Cadillacs, etc., etc., and it featured 5 songs written by Dwight alongside a cover of Johnny Cash's Ring of Fire. The record started getting airplay on independent Los Angeles radio stations. Then Dwight received another break when he was selected to open for the Blasters. That performance brought him to the attention of Reprise Records executive Paige Levy, who helped him sign with the label in 1986. Suddenly, the struggling musician who had been rejected, deceived, and told that his style did not fit was standing at the beginning of something much bigger. Reprise reissued Guitars, Cadillacs, etc., etc., with 4 additional tracks, turning it into Dwight's debut album. Its first single was his version of Johnny Horton's Honky Tonk Man. The song became a major success, reaching number 3 on Billboard's Hot Country Songs chart in 1986. In Canada, it went even further, reaching number 1 on the country chart published by RPM. Then came a moment that showed just how quickly Dwight was changing the country music landscape. The music video for Honky Tonk Man became the first video by a country artist to air on MTV. Dwight was no longer simply another young singer trying to break through. He was becoming a face of a different kind of country music, one that looked backward to traditional sounds while still feeling rebellious and modern. The success continued. Guitars, Cadillacs, etc., reached number 1 on Billboard's Top Country Albums chart. Its other singles, Guitars, Cadillacs, and It Won't Hurt, also made the country charts. 13 years after its release, the album was certified double platinum by the RIAA for shipments of 2 million copies in the United States. Awards soon followed. At the 1986 Academy of Country Music Awards, Dwight won Top New Male Vocalist. The following year, the album and Guitars, Cadillacs received Grammy nominations, while the Country Music Association nominated Dwight for the Horizon Award and Honky Tonk Man for Music Video of the Year. But Dwight was only getting started. In 1987, he released Hillbilly Deluxe, his second reprise album. Once again, he mixed traditional country influences with his own distinct style. One of the album's most personal songs was Readin', Writin', Route 23. Dwight wrote it about the towns along U.S. Route 23 in Kentucky, near the homes of his grandparents. It was more than another country song. It connected his growing fame back to the places and people who had shaped him as a child. Then came 1988 and Buenas Noches from a Lonely Room. The album became Dwight's third consecutive reprise release to reach number 1 on the Billboard Country Albums chart. It also produced something he had not achieved before: his first number 1 singles on the Hot Country Songs chart. One was I Sang Dixie. The other was Streets of Bakersfield, a duet with Buck Owens. That collaboration was especially important. Before the song was recorded for the album, Dwight had contacted Owens, who had stepped away from performing, and convinced him to perform it with him on a CBS television special. The success of the studio recording helped inspire Owens to return to the spotlight and eventually sign with Capitol Records again. Dwight's career was now doing more than making him famous. He was helping revive interest in artists and sounds that had been pushed aside. Buenas Noches from a Lonely Room earned another Grammy nomination for Dwight, while Streets of Bakersfield was nominated for Best Country Collaboration with Vocals and later received a CMA nomination. His rise was becoming impossible to ignore. By the end of the 1980s, Dwight released his first greatest hits collection, Just Lookin' for a Hit. It included 8 previously released singles and 2 new covers: the Blasters' Long White Cadillac and the Flying Burrito Brothers' Sin City, the latter recorded as a duet with K.D. Lang. Dwight had spent his entire career fighting to stay true to himself. He survived a failed promise in Ohio, struggled in Nashville, started over in Los Angeles, and built a career around a sound the mainstream initially rejected. That determination became part of his identity. Decades later, it made questions about his future even harder for fans to accept. He had spent his life proving he could survive almost anything. After reaching the top, what caused Dwight's career to slow down? Let's find out. From country superstar to a career that started slowing down. The 1990s began with Dwight Yoakam still firmly at the center of country music. His 4th studio album, If There Was a Way, arrived in 1990 and produced a string of successful singles. Turn It On, Turn It Up, Turn Me Loose reached number 11 on the country charts, while You're the One, Nothing's Changed Here, It Only Hurts When I Cry, and The Heart That You Own all became top 20 hits. The album also earned Dwight another Grammy nomination, showing that his momentum from the previous decade had not disappeared. But Dwight was changing as an artist. On If There Was a Way, he began writing more songs with other writers. One of the most important partnerships came with Roger Miller on It Only Hurts When I Cry. Dwight had met Miller at the Grammy Awards and told him how much he admired his music. Miller agreed to help write the song, even contributing backing vocals. Dwight also began working with songwriter Costas, a partnership that produced several successful songs over the years. Then came This Time in 1993, an album that showed Dwight was not interested in simply repeating himself. Ain't That Lonely Yet climbed to number 2 on the country charts and eventually earned him his first Grammy win for Best Male Country Vocal Performance. Other singles, including 1,000 Miles from Nowhere and Fast as You, also reached number 2. The album eventually became his highest RIAA certified release, reaching triple platinum status. Dwight was still winning awards, selling records, and filling venues. He even launched a massive 75-city tour in 1994, with Alison Krauss and Union Station opening for him. From the outside, everything looked strong, but the middle of the decade brought the first signs that his career was entering a different phase. In 1995, Dwight released Dwight Live, followed by the studio album Gone. While Gone was praised for its musical variety, it did not achieve the same commercial impact as some of his earlier work. The album explored rhythm and blues, mariachi, Tejano music, and psychedelic rock, proving once again that Dwight was willing to take risks. Yet some critics noted that he was receiving little radio airplay, and in certain areas, his tours were no longer drawing the crowds they once had. That trend continued with Under the Covers in 1997. The album was made entirely of cover songs, including music by the Everly Brothers, The Clash, Glenn Campbell, Sonny, and Cher, and The Beatles. Critics admired Dwight's ambition, but commercially, it was a quieter chapter. Later that year, he released Come On Christmas, an album that mixed original holiday songs with traditional Christmas favorites. Even so, Dwight remained respected. Between 1995 and 1998, he collected 3 consecutive Grammy nominations for Best Male Country Vocal Performance and 3 consecutive nominations for Best Country Album. His 1998 album, A Long Way Home, also brought him back to his roots. He wrote the entire project himself, and critics described it as a return to the sound that had made him famous in the first place. That same year, Dwight took part in A Tribute to Tradition, joining a remarkable group of country legends on Same Old Train. The song included artists such as Earl Scruggs, Merle Haggard, Clint Black, and Randy Travis. It eventually won the Grammy for Best Country Collaboration with Vocals, giving Dwight his second Grammy victory. Then came the end of the decade. In 1999, Dwight released Last Chance for 1,000 Years, Dwight Yoakam's greatest hits from the 90s. The collection included a new version of Queen's Crazy Little Thing Called Love, which became a major success, reaching number 12 on the country charts. It would also become his final number 1 country hit in Canada under the RPM chart system. By 2000, Dwight's long relationship with Reprise Records was coming to an end. He released Dwight Yoakam Acoustic.net, a stripped-down project built almost entirely around his voice and acoustic guitar. It was a fascinating contrast to the full-band sound that had defined so much of his career. He followed it with Tomorrow's Sounds Today, which included collaborations with Buck Owens. The Buck Owens reunion was especially meaningful. The two had already made history together with Streets of Bakersfield, but Owens had largely avoided further collaborations with Dwight during the 1990s. When they met again at a concert in 1999, that changed. They recorded several songs together, reconnecting Dwight with one of the biggest influences on his musical identity. After leaving Reprise, Dwight spent much of 2001 and 2002 touring with Brooks and Dunn, and eventually launched his own label, Electro Disc. In 2003, he released Population Me, followed by several compilation projects. But the days of constant chart dominance were becoming a thing of the past. In 2005, Dwight signed with New West Records and released Blame the Vein. It was significant for another reason. After ending his long creative partnership with Pete Anderson in 2004, Dwight took on the role of producer himself. The album had a harder, more aggressive sound, but its singles only reached the lower parts of the country charts. In fact, the album marked his last appearance on that chart. Still, Dwight refused to disappear. After Buck Owens died in 2006, Dwight began performing more of Owens's songs in concert. That eventually became Dwight Sings Buck in 2007, a full album dedicated to Owens's music. He continued recording, experimenting, and performing, even as his career moved further away from the commercial spotlight. In 2009 and 2010, he performed fewer concerts, citing the Great Recession and the rise of digital music as reasons for the slower pace. Yet, he insisted he still planned to make music, and he did. His 2012 album 3 Pairs reached number 18 on the Billboard 200, his highest position on that chart. Secondhand Heart followed in 2015 and reached number 2 on the Top Country Albums chart. In 2016, he surprised fans again with Swimmin' Pools, Movie Stars, a bluegrass reworking of songs from his career that even included a version of Prince's Purple Rain. By 2018, he had become more than a recording artist. SiriusXM gave him his own Bakersfield Beat programming, allowing him to showcase the music that had influenced his entire career. He continued touring, including the LSD Tour with Lucinda Williams, Steve Earle in 2022. Then, after 9 years without a new studio album, Dwight announced Brighter Days in 2024. That announcement proved something important. Despite the quieter periods, Dwight Yoakam had never truly walked away from music. He had simply changed the way he approached it. What made Dwight different enough to remain unforgettable for decades? Keep watching to find out. The unique style that made Dwight Yoakam impossible to replace. Dwight Yoakam never sounded like everyone else in country music. From the beginning, his style was built from a mix of honky-tonk, rockabilly, Bakersfield country, neo-traditional country, and rock and roll. Instead of following the polished Nashville sound that dominated parts of the industry, Dwight went in the opposite direction. He brought country music back toward its rougher, older roots, while adding enough rock energy to attract listeners who might never normally listen to country. That rebellious approach became one of his greatest strengths. Music writers often pointed to the influence of Buck Owens and Lefty Frizzell in Dwight's work. But there was another important ingredient: Pete Anderson's electric guitar. Anderson's playing helped give Dwight's music a sharper edge, similar in some ways to the guitar work of Don Rich with Buck Owens and the Buckaroos. Electric guitar and Hammond organ added a rock influence that helped Dwight connect with both country fans and roots rock listeners. His songwriting was just as unusual. Dwight described his writing process as fragmented. Rather than sitting down and writing a song from beginning to end, he would usually start with a melody, decide what mood he wanted, and then figure out the central idea. He deliberately avoided writing in a straight line, because he felt that forcing a song to come together in one sitting could leave him creatively exhausted. His childhood also stayed with him. The bluegrass music he heard growing up influenced the way he viewed songwriting, especially the contrast between cheerful melodies and heartbreaking stories. That combination became a natural part of Dwight's music. A song could sound upbeat while telling a story filled with loneliness, betrayal, or pain. And that helped explain why his audience became so unusual. Dwight attracted everyone from older country traditionalists to young punk rock fans who had discovered him while he was performing in Los Angeles. He could open shows for rock acts and still connect with hardcore country listeners. His music crossed boundaries without losing its identity. Even his personality added to the mystery. Dwight was often described as intensely private, thoughtful, ambitious, and almost restless. He once explained that musical expression was one of the ways he learned to connect with people. That was important because, despite being deeply analytical, songwriting gave him a place where he could express things he might not say directly. His appearance became part of that identity too. The oversized Stetson hat, ripped jeans, and Western-inspired clothing made him instantly recognizable. At first, some people questioned whether this California cowboy image was genuine, But by the time albums like Buenas Noches from a Lonely Room arrived, there was little doubt. Dwight had created a character that felt completely authentic. Then there was his voice. Writers described it as a high, lonesome twang, a sweetly nasal tenor, and a plaintive voice with a yodeling edge. It was not a voice designed to blend into the background. You could hear Dwight for only a few seconds and know exactly who was singing. That uniqueness was ultimately his greatest advantage. Dwight Yoakam did not become successful by changing himself to fit country music. He became successful because he refused to sound like anyone else. And that makes the questions about his future even more difficult. Because if Dwight eventually steps away, country music will not simply lose another singer. It could lose one of the last artists who made rebellion sound completely at home in a cowboy hat. So, what are your thoughts about Dwight Yoakam? Let us know in the comments section. In the end, Dwight Yoakam's journey reveals a legend facing an uncertain new chapter. Whatever lies ahead, his music and legacy remain unforgettable. Fans can only hope brighter days are still waiting. Like, subscribe, and join us for more.